There's a lot of weird games out there, and obviously Seaman is pretty high on the list. I remember hearing about this gem before the days of YouTube and before the big guns reviewed it, making it pretty much a household name for any retro historic fan searching the tubes. Now that's not me going down the route of I knew this game before it was cool to know it, blah blah blah, not at all. Because, if I'm gonna be honest, yes, I saw some pictures of the quirky Tamagotchi-like game in the import section of an old Dreamcast magazine, but I didn't play it until way after the death of the Dreamcast. Why? Well, firstly, it wasn't released in the UK, and sure, that wasn't really an issue thanks to a certain spinning reindeer, but honestly, an ugly Tamagotchi hybrid fish game, which if spoken incorrectly sounds like another word for spunk? Nah, not for me. America and Japan, you can keep this one. I'm gonna go and use my Dreamcast microphone for something far more enjoyable. Anyway, as you may have guessed, several years later I finally discovered what it was about, and like so many people out there, I was blown away. Seaman is one of the Dreamcast's many obscure little gems, and yet another reason why it is so important to own one of the Big Blue's very best systems ever. So, join me as we take a look at the Seaman franchise. Yes, franchise. There is more than just one game here, as both myself and good friend of the show Jimmy Happer take a look at its development, its crazy controllers, its weird ass marketing, and of course, the games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. There is quite a lot to talk about here that has hardly ever been touched on in the past. Seaman is a crazily weird series of games that I feel haven't exactly been looked at in enough detail so far. Sure, you know how the game works by now thanks to those big time YouTubers that I mentioned earlier, who by the way have skyrocketed the price of this game, but have you heard about this? This? Or even this? No, of course you haven't, and that's why you're here today, to push something far more important out of your brain, whilst Jimmy Happer and I go ahead and ooze as much of our personal Seaman knowledge directly into your brain. But hold up, Seaman 2, quirky controllers, unfunny sexual innuendos? Oh no. I think we're in fact getting a little ahead of ourselves. So, let's go back to the beginning. Introducing Ute Saito, easily most known for making the game that we're all talking about today. But he actually made a name for himself several years earlier with the breakthrough hit The Tower in 1994 in Japan and its sequel Ute Tower. Recognise it? Well, when it left Japan, Maxis, who were very well known for similar looking games, loved it so much that they quickly purchased the rights to publish the game under the popular Sim line of games. It was fairly uncommon for a Japanese developer to make such a Western style game that would appeal to not only Will Wright, but more importantly a worldwide audience. Which was nice because it was Will Wright's incredibly popular SimCity that boosted Saito's interest in game development, and on several interviews that I've read, if it wasn't for that legendary SimCity game, he possibly wouldn't have even gone down the video game path. Now sure, it wasn't as popular as several other sim-based games, especially SimCity, but it had its fans who were randomly dotted all over the world. The important thing is that this quality little game from a new game developer put Saito in the spotlight, and shortly after, he was approached by several companies. However, it was of course SEGA who asked him to work on a new game for their twirly logoed console of dreams. During that initial meeting, Sega gave Saito and his team several options on what type of game they would like to make. According to Sega, these were guaranteed, surefire, worldwide successful genres that Saito was going to turn into a reality. So, what are these guaranteed formulas for global domination? Well, option 1 was a more advanced and improved typical Dungeons & Dragons style video game. Option 2 was an adventure game using famous licensed Hollywood characters, and option 3 was a game focused around a rare beast that was like nothing ever created before. As you no doubt guess, he went for option 3. A strange choice for most, but nothing but an obvious one for Saito. I'm a game creator who is good at making new games. I'm not good at making sequels. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if that's true, mate, considering the crazy amounts of sequels and remakes that this game got, but whatever, let's move on. The inspiration for Seaman came from several different sources. What you're looking at here are the obviously obscure original sketches for the game. However, it all started back when Saito was a child and his dad took him to a museum, which is where he learnt about Coelacanth, a creature that at one point scientists had thought had long been extinct, before obviously discovering it once again. On top of this, Vivarium had just created an aquarium simulator, which the team somehow wanted to take advantage of. And the final seed of inspiration came from a stand-up comedian who at one point faced directly towards the camera and said, "What are you looking at, you dumbass?" And one night in a bar, Saito, talking about the comedian, joked about a fish in a tank saying the exact same thing. So, after creating the Seaman concept drawings, Saito showed his wife to get her opinion, and she hated it. But she still suggested that he went ahead with it anyway, because she couldn't get that ugly cave-like drawing out of her mind. This was when Saito realised the more people that hated a character, the more they became obsessed with them. So he decided to create a rude, unlikable, but memorable character. The design of Seaman came quickly after, with a moody persona staring directly into your living room, leaving the player confused but intrigued. Saito's loyal team fell instantly in love with the idea, and according to interviews with Saito, they all quit their jobs to help push this concept forward. Even Sega, who I'm sure had no idea what they was looking at first, fully fell in love with the idea. So, before we get into any more of the game's development and weird marketing, let's actually take a look at the game itself, shall we? Seaman is a virtual pet game, a very weird virtual pet game, which is like no other. When you think of virtual pets, you think of these things, Tamagotchis, and because of that, it's likely that you're going to be put off by it. Don't be. Seaman is a bizarre, almost grown-up experience in this genre, that, like I said earlier, actually uses the Dreamcast's microphone in order to play. After you set your tank's air and heating to just the right levels and drop in your Seaman egg, the game has begun. Nothing much happens in this early stage. You can poke the egg, you can move the rocks, and, well, not really a lot else. But soon after, that egg hatches and the real game begins. Now, when I say the real game, well, that's a bit of a stretch. You can obviously try and communicate with your Seaman, which gets easier the more you go on, but it's still pretty bare bones. What I'm trying to say is that if you don't mess around with the Dreamcast clock, what you have is a very slow game. But hey, it's a virtual pet. Of course it's going to be slow. However, it's when you get to the talking part in the game, when you and Seaman can communicate to one another, that it all becomes fully worth it. I've only once played through the game fully myself, but I have got to this stage several times. The more you play it, the more you realise how unique this game is. not just in the graphical department, but also, and this may come to a bit of a shock, the initial intention of Saito is that Seaman would eventually start to raise you. It may sometimes take a bit of time, but he constantly asks you questions about your life, your family, your political views. It's a weird game, and that first time you play through it, it's just so exciting to pick up the controller and answer more questions. It's this brilliant back and forth that creates an amazing connection between you and your slim shady looking fish-faced friend. And it's this unique twist on top of the tried and tested watch your pet grow to become something that you helped create formula, which gives you something that is truly unique and 100% fully deserving of its reputation. As you no doubt already know, Seaman's voice was Leonard Nimoy. Well, okay, Spock from Star Trek. I've heard this over and over again in reviews whilst creating my complete history. But actually, that's not true. The real voice actor was Jeff Cromer. Spock was just the narrator. Jeff also lent his voice to other several legendary games. He is E123 Omega in both Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games and Shadow the Hedgehog. He's Jaguar in Space Channel 5, which by the way I've also done a complete history on. And he's also the Owl in the Wii game Knight's Journey of Dreams. Oh, and by the way, I've done that one too. And it's his incredibly dry wit that can be found with Seaman that surely has got to be an absolute highlight of this video game voice actor's career. And if you want a good example of this, then put the game in your CD player. Has anyone ever put a Dreamcast disc in a CD player? You always get that iconic sound clip.
This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.
Well, awesomely, a different clip plays when you put Seaman in your CD player.
This is a SEGA Dreamcast disc. This is not a music CD. If you continue, you run the risk of transmitting deadly viral diseases to your household electronic appliances. Jeez, some people.
So we've talked about the game, its history and its development, but did you know it also had one of Sega's more obscure marketing campaigns too? I actually featured this before in my top 10 crazy marketing stunts by Sega video. But for those that haven't watched that yet, not only will I leave a nice clickable card right here for you, but I'll also give you a brief rundown. Mr. Saito basically had his website changed before the game came out to the American Science Journal Online, which was an online blog that not many people at the time realised was actually a promotion for a game. But obviously it was. It followed the French explorer looking for the elusive Seaman creature and was updated with images and videos of his latest scientific findings. According to old forums dotted about the internet, thank you Wayback Machine, this actually turned out to be a fairly popular as far as early 2000 internet marketing went, and in my opinion it has got to be one of the strangest video game marketing pieces that the company has ever done. But then again, the planned blowing up of a building to promote Streets of Rage 2 never went ahead. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, that fake explorer's blog ended on this fantastically poorly acted video just as hype for the game started to build up.
Good evening. I'm Dorian Henderson, and this is the 6 o'clock news. Our top story this evening concerns a legendary creature that some say could overturn Darwin's theory of evolution. Known as Seaman, this creature will go on public display for the first time in Japan. Seaman was first discovered in 1933 by the French biologist Jean-Paul Gasset. However, the lack of any living specimen cast doubt about its existence. All of that changed when a living Seaman was captured for the first time near Alexandria, Egypt. This astonishing event has focused worldwide attention on this unique creature. One of the most unusual characteristics of the Seaman is its ability to undergo rapid genetic change. This allows the creature to adapt to its environment by morphing into various forms. Researchers have also discovered that knowledge gained by one Seaman can be passed on to later generations on a genetic level. This latest information lends new credibility to Professor Gassay's original theory that the Seaman has the ability to pass knowledge to future generations, allowing the creatures to contribute to the development of ancient civilizations. Noted researcher Professor William Sutherland of the Institute of Bioanthroarchaeology is in Japan to oversee the Seaman exhibit.
Now obviously, even though the marketing was bloody ingenious, Seaman wasn't exactly flying off the shelves. I mean, it did well, but obviously it wasn't exactly a huge seller. With that said, Sega actually wasn't expecting the game to do as well as it did, and Saito remembers being frustrated when sales for the microphone sold out and the game got put on serious backorder, while Sega scrambled to make more. Weirdly, it seems it wasn't existing Dreamcast owners that lapped up the game, but instead the game ended up attracting a large female audience, which resulted in quite a few sales of the system in Japan. Because of this, quite a few limited editions and crazy variants of the game ended up being released, as well as the often overlooked sequel to the cult classic Seaman 2. This is something I've wanted to talk about and look into for a really long time. Plus, it's actually quite cheap. The only issue is I can't speak or understand Japanese, a pretty big hurdle for a game built around communication. So, for the first time ever on A Complete History, I'll be handing you over into the very capable hands of Jimmy Happer, who will dig deep into the unknown world of Japanese exclusive Seaman goodness. And apparently, there's quite a bit. Jimmy, take it away.
That's right, Larry. Compared to the rest of the world, Seaman managed to spill onto a whole lot of products and merchandise in Japan. Beyond the original Dreamcast game, there were guides and fan books, of course, but so much more, including the bizarre official soundtrack and drama CDs, Seaman plushies, promotional figurines, keychains, clothing, and the like. There were even cell phone applications from before the smartphone era, allowing you to play with your Seaman on the go, as well as Seamail for Windows, a desktop application that helped manage schedules and send messages, kind of like a Seaman themed Outlook, with the baby Gilman taking on the role of desktop assistant. This software also came with an extra disc called the Present Disc, which you could give to someone to access special messages from you through email, but delivered via Seaman. Pretty cool, huh? However, the real cool Japanese Seaman goodness came in the form of games and gaming hardware. There was the official Seaman skeleton case Dreamcast console, a beauty of a system that came with a limited edition of the game. And for a very brief period in the winter of 1999, an amazing Christmas Seaman package was made available that came bundled with a gorgeous red console and a holiday-themed Seaman game set. This software, titled Christmas Seaman, Omoi o tsutaeru mou hitotsu no hoho, or another way of sending your thoughts, allowed users to send a special Christmas greeting to a friend or loved one, which would be sent by email and accessed by a special present disc, just like with Seamail. One such disc was included in each kit, but more could be purchased separately for about $10 each, and the full kit was available apart from the console bundle for about $30. This service was only up until early January of the following year, so these discs have been simple collector's items for quite a long time now. And as for the last drop of Seaman on the Dreamcast, near the end of the year 2000, developer Vivarium self-published an updated 2001 edition in Japan to coincide with the North American release. This included all the bug fixes and improvements made for that version, among them tweaks to game progression and balance, improved speech recognition, and an increased range of vocabulary and topics of conversation for your virtual pet. In an effort to promote the game to women and casual gamers, it was also marketed and sold at convenience stores such as 7-Eleven. The next year, Seaman would make its way to Sony's popular PlayStation 2, courtesy of ASCII. A standard PS2 USB microphone can be used to communicate with, but ASCII crafted a special microphone-equipped controller, dubbed the C-Mic, for use especially with this game, which came packed in with the software. A second, more stylized Seaman controller was also put on the market, this one done all in gold, and made to look like an ancient Egyptian artifact. Either of these controllers work just fine, and can be used as microphones for other PS2 games that enable voice functionality. The jump to a newer, more powerful platform translated to sharper graphics, more detailed textures, and a smoother frame rate, as well as improved communication features over its Dreamcast predecessor. But this edition of Seaman is much more than a simple port with a facelift, as this little sticker on the cover of the game alludes to. While it's not a completely different game, there are many changes to how the game progresses, as well as newly added content. The egg hatching and Nautilus birth scenarios have been scrapped, and acquiring a Seaman is now done in the waters off of Micronesia, where you can lure one in by dropping a bug larva into the ocean. After caring for and conversing with this baby gillman, you can take him to the lab, and the game plays out mostly like it does on the Dreamcast. However, the feeding routine has also been changed quite drastically. Instead of having an inventory box of pellets and raising bugs in a cage, procuring food takes place in a lush forest, where you can rip off bark from a tree to collect bug larvae or catch flying moths to give to your Seaman for sustenance. Because you can now only raise one pet at a time, in order to progress further than the Podman form, you must release your precious Seaman into the ocean and find a suitable partner, a sea woman, who you'll have to converse with over several days to gain her trust. And where the original ended, the PS2 edition continues on, and your Seaman will meet his Dreamcast predecessor in a bizarre breaking of the fourth wall that, when it comes to this series, is honestly not surprising in the least. More surprising is finding a Dreamcast logo in a PlayStation 2 game. If these two Seamen meet up again and mate, they'll give birth to another type of Seaman beyond the froggy type, Iguani, which as the name suggests, has the body of an iguana. The final step towards seeing the end credits is teaching this lazy, somewhat reclusive creature how to swim, and freeing him into the ocean, where he can embark on bigger adventures on his own. Much like the Dreamcast release, the PlayStation 2 also got itself an updated version of Seaman, this time put out by D3 Publisher in 2003. Dubbed the Kanzenban, or Complete Edition, it added a few new features to the game, such as pressing select throughout to get detailed explanations and hints from the narrator, as well as a journal that tracks your progress in the game. This edition also reintroduces the egg hatching and Nautilus bits back into the mix, making this the definitive version of Seaman. Well, for anyone who speaks Japanese anyway.
お前結婚してるって言ってたな。子供は？まだいないってことか。まあお前まだ新婚だからな。今のうちに2人の時間をせいぜい満喫してくれよ。予定は？
In the eyes of fans of the Dreamcast game, Seaman on the PS2 is probably a pretty neat addition to the series. But there's an even neater Seaman release that never left its home country that all should be aware of. The 2007 SEGA published Seaman 2, also for Sony's second console. Looking at the cover, you might think that our little Seaman has evolved to the point where his entire body matches his human face. But the game's subtitle, Peking Genjin Ikuse Kitto, or the Peking Man Raising Kit, should instantly cast doubt on that thought. While there are many elements in this sequel that are reminiscent of the game that came before it, overall it's a very different experience, as the game's introduction should clue you onto, where you are charged with creating a small island, as well as life, on a tiny planet, eventually to the point where said island becomes lush and vibrant. The star of Seaman 2 is no Seaman at all, and as the name of the game suggests, it focuses on the exploits of a Peking Man, a prehistoric ancestor of modern humans whose remains were initially discovered in China in the 1920s. This little fellow's name is Gabo-chan, and he's basically a helpless blank slate starting off, so it's up to you to take care of him as he explores the small island. And at least at first, Seaman 2 is less of a virtual pet simulator and more of a god simulation game. The degree with which you can communicate with Gabo-chan is quite limited, since you can only teach him basic vocabulary and give him the simplest of commands, but he learns quickly. You can tap around the screen to get his attention, but more often you'll use a Denden Daiko, or Japanese pellet drum, that the furry fella finds and gifts to you early on to get him to move around and interact with objects. He has both a visible happiness and fullness meter, so you know when it's a good time to fetch him a banana or lift his spirits with a bit of tickling, just like the original game. Gameplay takes place over the course of one in-game day, which usually lasts between 30 minutes to an hour, and can be played just once per real-world day, though you can change the date settings in your PS2 if you're impatient. Gabo-chan can fetch items for you on the island, such as pearls, which can be exchanged for cash, which in turn can be exchanged for more items or food for Gabo-chan. Oddly, there's quite a bit of product placement in this game, and you'll be able to spend your money on real-life items like Meiji brand chocolate and Pepsi Cola to feed your tiny pal. The Peking Man isn't all alone on the island, because there are various animals he can learn how to hunt for food and skins, and later on he'll meet Lucy, a female love interest based on the famous primate of the same name that was discovered in Africa in the 1940s. You have a small battery-run device at your disposal that can simulate weather effects, allowing you to generate winds and rain, earthquakes to heat up the island, and lightning bolts, which are usually used to clear out trees, stun animals to aid in hunting, and set piles of sticks on fire to cook fish and meat. So far, Seaman 2 seems completely removed from the original, huh? But fans of the first game going through Seaman withdrawals need not despair, as the weird, iconic manfish frog actually does play a major role in this strange sim. Seaman, or should I say Seamanbird, has evolved quite a bit since we last saw him, and proclaims himself to be the master of the island. Throughout the game, he'll narrate important milestones, offer advice, and sometimes even give the player items to pass along onto the cavemen. But most importantly, he is the person who pays for the various pearls, skins, and other goods you collect, as well as the merchant who sells food and tools. He greets you each morning and night, and engages in conversation over a broad range of topics, both deep and silly, much like he did in the Dreamcast prequel. And every evening, he'll even offer to tell your fortune before heading out. For a price. Seaman 2 takes the player on quite a journey with Gabo-chan, who experiences the joys of life, as well as the tragedy of death. Like all mortal creatures, in time, Gabo-chan himself becomes a victim to fate, leaving behind a small child, Yusuke, exclusively in your care. This child soon grows into a man, one scores more intelligent than his parents, and capable of normal communication with the player through a cell phone. In a way, Seaman 2 only truly begins when Yusuke becomes the center of the game, and transforms from a simple god simulation into a more appropriate sequel to Seaman. Anyway, I could go on and on about this game, but I'll cut it here, since I think everyone should have a pretty clear idea of what Seaman 2 is all about by now. I want to thank Larry for having me on here so I could talk about these Japan-only Seaman games. I've been wanting to cover them for ages. Maybe I'll do a proper Import Gaming for the Win episode on Seaman 2 someday. Who knows? Anyway, Larry, buddy, back to you.
Larry? Larry? Who the f*** is Larry?
買ってきたぞ。シーマン。
今度はどうした？また悩んでんのか？
悩んじゃったよ。
人間関係か？
Seaman Dreamcast!
Anyway, as you've now seen, the Seaman franchise is quite a bit bigger than you originally expected. I was blown away when creating this episode at just how big it was. In fact, the franchise almost had another game made for it on the 3DS under the working title Seaman 3DS. But it was the sad passing of Satoru Iwata, who was a good friend of Yuji Saito, that unfortunately ended its development, as seen here in a blog post written by Saito shortly after his death. In the blog post, he explains that Satoru Iwata was tasked with a special assignment to get new types of games that haven't been on a Nintendo platform before. Sadly, due to complications on Saito's side, he had to let the project go. It's worth reading the whole thing, as it's quite the love letter to that legendary Nintendo icon. So, that's it, right? Well, actually no. In fact, it doesn't look like it's going to be the complete history of Seaman for very long, which, like I've said before, is nothing but a good thing. Yuji Saito and his team of Seaman creators are back, and according to several Twitter snaps, it looks like a new game is actually in development. Is it a remake? Is it a sequel? Is it the ultimate journey splurging both Seaman 1 and 2 together to create the ultimate Seaman experience? I bloody hope so. Fingers crossed that this game eventually does see the light of day, and that videos like this one, as well as the ones from those mighty popular English speaking YouTubers out there, will help raise awareness on the Seaman franchise, so we can get a nice translated version over here too. And Sega, if you're watching this video when this game does come out, please invite me to the aquarium launch party. I want to get myself some nice tinned Seaman. Seaman. Damn it. If you was going to rattle off your opinion of the world's greatest games, what would be your criteria? Would it be the game that conjures up the most nostalgia of that Christmas morning opening? A game that has given you the most multiplayer action between friends? Is it the game that has mastered the perfect blend of art, music, gameplay and storytelling? Or is it the game that you hands down have played more than any other game you have ever owned? If that last one is the case, then Crazy Taxi for the Dreamcast would be extremely high on my list, and might as well be crowned the greatest game of all time. I've never pumped more time into a game than with Crazy Taxi. My god, I was obsessed. Okay, it's not my favourite game of all time, but heck, it's in my top 10, which in turn probably means I've listened to The Offspring and Bad Religion more times than any other artist in existence. Such a simple idea, a boring idea in all honesty, a taxi simulator. But damn it, a taxi simulator with more personality and style than most entire franchises put together. And even though the game is essentially one of the most repetitive concepts of a game going, it ended up creating such a huge legacy that to this day, I still play the same few maps over and over again until I'm once again fluent in grabbing myself a Class S license. Oh yes, today on Slope's Game Room, I plan to cover the entire history of my personal favourite game for one of my all-time favourite consoles. And on top of this, I plan to discover everything from the franchise's origins, the people that made it, and how such a simple idea ended up becoming one of the 6th generation's most addictive games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room.
Hey, come on over, have some fun with Crazy Taxi!
Hey, you're listening to Slope's Game Room of Crazy Taxi! I'm not going to do this whole episode like that. I just can't. As you no doubt guessed, I'm a bit of a fanboy to this franchise. I feel like I need to get that off my chest instantly. But hey, if you too admire the frantic gameplay that is Crazy Taxi for the Dreamcast, then at least you know that you're in good hands here. But before we all meet up at Tower Records, KFC or Pizza Hut, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So, let's go back to the beginning. Have you ever been stuck in traffic in the middle of a massive heat wave with no air conditioning on, no point in opening the window? That ain't gonna do nothing. You look over to the other side of the road in jealousy as you see an open motorway with free flowing traffic. Well, don't feel too down in the dumps over it. It's not all bad, because during one of these boring as hell moments, Crazy Taxi's creator Kenji Kano remembers seeing a quiet lane on the opposite side of the road and thought how cool it would be to drive onto it and fly down the road. I was sure there were many people sitting in their cars who would have agreed with me. And there you have it. The first seed of an idea was planted into the mind of the Sega worker. Shortly after, a team of only 12 began working on the project that would take Kenji's bare bone idea and somehow try and turn it into an arcade game. Not long after, Kenji decided to make the player a taxi driver. And as you would expect, a taxi simulator game, no matter how fast it is, didn't exactly go down well with several members of his team. Sega, after all, were all about the classic arcade high adrenaline games, and up to this point, they've always managed to gain considerable success in making games like this. And a taxi game didn't really spark too much interest in the team. It was very difficult for us to draw a consensus on making a game out of a taxi theme. Some of the team were worried that the concept wouldn't be cool enough to polarise an arcade game around. Sure, we can all sit here now and with hindsight on our side kick off at such backlash being spoken of our beloved game. But really, it makes sense. Add some dinosaurs, guns or aliens, and even though that would be a bit weird, it also would have been a lot more obvious for the time. Either way, Kenji obviously put his foot down, and after 18 months in production in 1999, Crazy Taxi showed up slotted between several other arcade machines, all of which, as good as they probably were basically just more of the same. A slightly better gun game or a slightly better racing game, Crazy Taxi on the other hand, stood out. It's something new and shiny, a breath of much needed fresh air in the slow demise that was the arcade space. But what made it so good? Well, not only was it a fresh idea, it also had quite a bit of retro injected into it. Just like the classic arcade games of old, this was all about your score. Well, technically money, but you get the idea. And although games like Donkey Kong or Pac-Man, to name a few, had most people die after literally a few minutes of gameplay, if you was a skilled player, however, you could probably keep going for, dare I say it, hours just on one credit. Crazy Taxi was exactly like this, rewarding the player the more they played it. Plus, the cabinet looks damn nice too. The game ran on Sega's infamous new arcade Operation Machine Idea hardware. It was set in an overly colourful, almost Californian setting, and well, it just oozes quality. I wanted people to enjoy playing it, so the in-game weather is extremely bright. We really wanted it to complement the refreshing style of the game. The idea is simple. After the announcer starts you off,
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
you simply drive to any of your potential customers, indicated by the waving of arms and big coloured circles around them. The greener the circle, the longer the destination, and therefore the greater the risk and the greater the reward. If you grab a red circled Patreon, then you guessed it, a shorter, easier journey with a much smaller payoff at the end. But that really is just the basics of the game, and it's huge for the time world that you're playing. Not only do you need to take your new client to any of the random places they ask for, yes, including Tower Records, KFC and Pizza Hut, as quickly as possible, but you also gotta do it with as much crazy style as possible too. Slightly dodging traffic, grabbing some serious air, and mastering the crazy manoeuvres. Such as the crazy dash, meaning you get to accelerate pretty damn quickly from a standalone space. The crazy drift, which obviously means you get to drift around corners, and the crazy stop, which, well, makes you stop quickly. Combine all these in a game that looks and sounds this good, and well, still not convinced? Honestly, if you only play the game once or twice, then I can see why. After all, it is, again, like I say, a taxi simulator, but invest just a tiny bit more time into it, trying to get a slightly higher license at the end of the game, and you will very quickly see why this game has such a massive following behind it. And that's just the arcade game. Being that the game was made on that Naomi arcade board is very quickly and easily able to get ported to the Dreamcast. And strangely enough, and I'm struggling to think of many other examples that I can say this about, the console port is better than the arcade original. In this version you have the gameplay in all of its entirety, with tighter controls, being that this is one of the few games where you control a car and it's better to play on a controller rather than a steering wheel. But you also get a whole new map, plus the ability to literally play for just 3, 5 or 10 minutes on both maps. This is a great way to build up your skills. And finally you have the Crazy Box. Okay, looking back now, there definitely could have been more added in this section. But hey, it's still a nice selection of 16 sort of mini games that are both used as a way to get the highest score, which you can then brag about to your mates. But also, again, this really does help with you learning those crazy manoeuvres. Overall, Crazy Taxi is seriously a game that you need to play. And heck, if you have played it, which you most definitely should have, then go back and play it again. Hopefully this video review has helped give you enough nostalgia to dust off the old Dreamcast, boot up your old VMU save and play Crazy Taxi the way it should be played, on the Dreamcast. And don't even bother with the crappy GameCube, PlayStation 2, PC, 360, PSN or phone releases, as most of them have pretty choppy visuals, basically due to them being ports of a port. But worst of all, some of those imitations don't even have Offspring or Bad Religion on the soundtrack. Absolutely criminal.
Game rated T for teens.
Yeah, I'm here for my license.
Get behind that yellow line!
Yeah, I know. License, please.
You better get out of my face! You ain't gonna get your punk license
Yeah,
back!
I
Look what I
know.
got on you! You drive through the mall, the subway, city bar, you like a direct
That was some big air.
What's your problem?
Hey, that's what I get paid for. I made some serious cake that day.
Crazy Taxi on SEGA Dreamcast. It's thinking.
Let's face it, everyone watching this video knows and hopefully loves Crazy Taxi. However, if you want to try something new, I suggest checking out Harley Davidson and LA Riders, a very similar style game, but this time you're obviously riding a Harley Davidson going from checkpoint to checkpoint. The reason I bring this game up is that it's said that the idea for Harley Davidson and LA Riders game, which came out a couple of years before Crazy Taxi, was basically an early development experiment by SEGA, just dipping their toes into this type of genre. It's almost a prequel, if you will. And hey, if that's still not enough, then go check out these games too. Anyway, back to Crazy Taxi. After the success that was Crazy Taxi, we obviously got Crazy Taxi 2.
We're back. It's Crazy Taxi 2.
This is more of the same, but damn it, that is a good thing. This time set in a fictional representation of New York, you still go and pick up passengers, including the new blue circled customers, who are basically groups of passengers, which require you to drop several off on one journey, which obviously gives you a nice overall payout and time boost at the end. And you also have the implementation of the Crazy Hop, which will help you get plenty of air whilst quickly jumping to normal unreachable parts of the stage. Honestly, that is really it. The thing with Crazy Taxi is they got it right first time, and this, by today's standards, is really just DLC. But that's cool too, because the game currently goes for about 10 or 15 quid for the original Dreamcast copy, and therefore I think it's priced accordingly. In my opinion, the original Crazy Taxi is my favourite out of the two, only due to the fact that I've mastered every single pixel of that arcade map. However, once you really get to grips with Crazy Taxi 2, it's probably the superior game. It's most definitely harder than the original and requires you to master those crazy manoeuvres far more to get a higher ranked license, as well as taking on the far more challenging Crazy Box minigames, which are now called Crazy Pyramid. But hey, my video, my opinion. I know number 1 is by far the most popular in the series, so please, leave your angry comments telling me I don't know what I'm talking about in the comments below. And by the way, if you want to play both Crazy Taxi 1 and Crazy Taxi 2 and don't own a Dreamcast, you could always go and get the Crazy Taxi Fair Wars, or Crazy Taxi Double Punch as it was known in Japan, for the PSP, as it's sort of a port of both 1 and 2. But like I said earlier, the classic Offspring and Bad Religion music is now missing, as well as many of the real world locations. I don't know about you, but I would much rather go to Pizza Hut over the pizza parlour. On top of this, the game features multiplayer via ad hoc wireless, as well as game sharing with only one copy of the game needed, so that's quite a nice touch. However, the game obviously doesn't look as good as the original or Dreamcast port, and to be fair, a game with as much going on as Crazy Taxi, for me, it just doesn't sit well on a tiny little screen with a tiny crappy analog. If you want to play these games, just go and get the originals.
Crazy Taxi 3. High Roller.
This was the perfect next step for the series. Other than the fairly poor loading times, Crazy Taxi 3 High Roller is actually quite a lot of fun. Firstly, the game has the original arcade game from the Dreamcast version, this time featuring the Crazy Hop. Plus you also have the Small Apple stage from Crazy Taxi 2. but this time it's set at night. Then obviously you have the new stage, Glitter Oasis, obviously based on Las Vegas. Sadly, it's the only new stage in the game, and although sure you get 3 altogether, it would have been nice if they at least added one more to keep up with the previous releases that both had 2 new maps each. Heck, am I being greedy and actually wanting 3 new maps considering it is the 3rd installment in the series? Yeah, probably. Even though it's on new, more powerful hardware, it actually does sadly suffer from a fair bit of slowdown from time to time on that new stage. However, it doesn't take away from the fun, and I think that Crazy Taxi 3 stands quite nicely next to the 2 games before it. It's probably the worst game in the trilogy, but it is still worth hunting down if you do own that original Xbox. Crazy Box, or Crazy Pyramid, or whatever you want to call it, has returned as well. This time cleverly titled Crazy X. If you like the minigames, then this is actually probably the best game in the series, as it features 25 little play sessions in total. Now, Crazy Taxi 3 was actually originally going to be Crazy Taxi Next, an online play game to take advantage of the new Xbox Live feature. But sadly, this never happened, and a lot of the features such as day and night cycles actually ended up in this game anyway. And other than the PC port, the only other sort of version was actually for the Sega Chihiro. Don't worry, it's not a console you've never heard of. It's an arcade system produced by Sega back in 2003, which was actually based upon the original Xbox. But obviously for the arcade, they dropped the 3 from the title due to Crazy Taxi 2 being a Dreamcast exclusive. And overall, it's actually a really great attempt at bringing Crazy Taxi home to the arcades one last time. It plays brilliantly, obviously missing those Crazy X minigames, and is well worth seeking out if you ever do get the chance and see it in the wild. Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride for the GBA is a sad time for the series, getting mostly negative reviews, and well, fair play to them for attempting to bring it to a crazily underpowered machine. Racing games have been done well on the system, but sadly Crazy Taxi Catch a Ride is not a good example of this. 2 worlds, 1 which is unlockable, and 9 minigames. Get the game if you're collecting, but really you shouldn't bother getting it for anything other than the beautiful cover art. Which finally brings us to the last game in the series, Crazy Taxi City Rush, which is a smartphone game. And actually, it's far closer to a game like Temple Run than the original trilogy. So, taking that original trilogy out of the equation, what you have here is a game that really isn't actually that bad at all. Is it the worst game on this list? Probably, other than Catch a Ride. Is it completely forgettable like most endless runners on mobile phones after you finish your morning poo? Yeah, probably. But is it a bad game? No, it's not. It tries its best to keep the style of that original, and sadly with the cartoony cel-shaded graphics, they don't really pull it off. Hopefully this isn't Sega's attempt at testing the market for the series, as from what I've heard it didn't actually do too great, even with the Hulk Hogan add-on DLC. And other than the odd appearance in Sega All-Star Racing and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed, as well as The Crazy, a board used in the not-so-great Sonic Riders series, probably the worst minigame for the iToy on Sega Superstars for the PS2, and finally the Crazy Taxi token distribution coin rolling game, that's really it. Except for this. Oh my god, will someone please buy me this RC car? Crazy Taxi. Sure, it's not one of Sega's biggest, but it's one of Sega's best. A great franchise that to this day I'm still aching for a proper 4th game in the series. Or at least a complete compilation on newer consoles, I'm not fussy. Sega know what they've got with this one. At least 2 attempts to turn this franchise into a movie, with Richard Donner, famous for directing such movies as Superman and Lethal Weapon, at the helm. But due to an absence of plot elements, it never happened. Since then, Crazy Taxi the movie and or TV show is still a possibility. But then again, so is Altered Beast, Streets of Rage, Shinobi, Rise of Nightmares, Virtual Fighter and Golden Axe. So take from that what you will. And that is officially it. So far. So, why not get behind the wheel once more and take to the streets with Axel, Beady Joe, Gina, Gus or any of the other characters from the later games and go make some crazy money? Who knows, you could even end up with that extremely rare and super hard to achieve crazy license.
Crazy! That's it. That's all I got to say. Crazy Taxi. Game over.
Certain games, honestly, are not all that popular. Certain games require you to actually be a bit of a gamer to know that they even exist. However, if you are interested in trying new gaming experiences rather than the obvious top 10 games that Argos offer you, well, that's when games like this will fall onto your radar. And if you ask me, you will be better off for it. Yes, I know that Rez isn't the most obvious choice for a complete history, and I know for a fact that it's not going to pull in the numbers that the other big complete histories do. But for those of you guys out there that have played Rez or any of its other big re-releases, this one is for you. You see, Rez sadly was a bit of a latecomer to the Dreamcast, released at a time when most people had already jumped ship. Unofficial Dreamcast magazines were desperate for content, and the official one, well, that had already stopped almost a year and a half ago in the UK. But with all that said, those loyal Dreamcast goers that actually gave this game a chance didn't just experience a cool new game, but instead they got to experience a gaming sensation that few others were able to do before it. And that's why Rez, a game that the average Joe may not have heard about, actually ended up gaining a bit of a cult following. So, join me as we look into exactly why that is, as we look into everything Rez, from its creator's inspiration, its rather lengthy development, its many re-releases and remakes, and of course, the game itself. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. Honestly, when it comes down to collector's editions of this game, I own none, and I'm desperate for them all. The I Am 8-bit vinyl box set looks amazing, and the Japanese exclusive PlayStation 2 with vibrating headphones and vibrating, well, whatever this is, would look stunning on my growing gaming shelf, but sadly, they're not there. But with that said, this collector's set is based on the PlayStation 4 VR release, and this collector's set is based on the PlayStation 2 release. Yeah, I think we're in fact getting a little ahead of ourselves, guys. So, let's go back to the beginning. Welcome to one of the greatest decades to ever exist, the 1980s, and just to make it a little bit better, the 1980s in Japan. And whilst we're here, let me introduce you to Tetsuya Meguchi, or Miz as he's more well known to his friends and family, as he is very much the star of this story. You see, old Miz here didn't even want to make video games originally, but instead in his early days he was more interested in the MTV generation. Wasn't we all? Music itself is without a doubt the most popular art form to ever exist. However, during the 80s, the popularity of music videos exploded the medium even further, and Miz simply wanted in. In his early days at Neon University College of Arts, he studied media aesthetics and attempted to merge his ideas and his emotions found in the music that he was listening to and convert them into a visual format to go alongside the music. But this idea didn't last. He graduated in 1990 and felt that the medium of music video creation had become saturated and was no longer the exciting fresh concept that he once saw it as. However, video games? Well, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention. The very same year, he found himself boarding a plane to the first ever international virtual reality conference, and from this, his interest in gaming grew and grew. From here, he ended up getting himself a job at SEGA themselves in research aesthetics. And even though he didn't see himself as a game designer per se, he did in fact work on his first ever game of sorts, which I'm extremely happy to say that yes, I have played this one. And that game was Megalopolis. For those of you that don't know, Megalopolis is a game that was the part of Sega's AS1 motion simulator, which you, the rider, can be a part of.
As well as the traditional arcade machines, Sega are looking at a new generation of arcade simulators. A high-quality video image is projected in front of you as you move in synchronization with the path of your vehicle. The ride is called Megalopolis Tokyo City Battle. You are riding the latest generation of police pursuit vehicle chasing after arch-terrorists. Your pilot takes you through the skyways and streets of Neon Tokyo in the year 2054.
Sadly, the ride or game, whatever you want to call it, wasn't exactly a big hit for Sega, most likely due to the cost of the thing. But from what I remember, it was awesome. It was this ride and the music that went alongside it that took Mitsuguchi-san back to his visual and sound music video roots, and he quickly grouped together several other members in the same boat who worked on this futuristic godsend to work on his first proper video game. Sega Rally Championship was the game that the small team worked on, and it was quite the challenge as it was one of the first games made for the Sega Model 2 arcade hardware.
At the time, all of our programmers, all our engineers, all our artists, we only had to know how to work in 2D. Transitioning from 2D to 3D basically meant we had to do a major overhaul with all aspects of work. We didn't have any mentors or guidance, really. There was no one there who would come in and tell us what to do. We just had to learn it on our own.
It took only 1 year for the game to be created from beginning to end, and it was such a big success for Sega, several other racing games continued to be made by the team for the next several years. However, Mitsuguchi-san simply wasn't feeling it.
Sega Rally Championship.
In an interview, he explains that every single gaming company who was releasing these arcade racing games were after realism, and the future was, well, it was Gran Turismo. And the idea of a game like that bored him. You see, it was whilst Miz was in Europe researching cars for Sega Rally Championship 2 that he had a little time off and decided to visit Switzerland, which was when he decided to have a couple of days off and go to the world's biggest, for the time, techno parade.
It was in this massive arena with over 100,000 people and just one DJ in this booth, and I guess you could call what they were doing dancing? But it wasn't really, to me, people dancing. It was this massive movement of human bodies.
And as he watched the huge mass of people swaying and bobbing along to the beat, he decided to somehow make a game that captured that feeling. Shortly after, upon his return, he was given a life-changing opportunity back at Sega HQ. Sega was about to release one of the best and sadly last proper consoles, the Dreamcast, and the head at Sega at the time, one Shiroshiro Irimajiri, proposed a new game studio headed by Mitsuguchi-san himself with a very unique goal.
Create games that would reach gamers outside of their traditional audience. Teenage girls, musicians, non-gamers, artists, anybody land the rest of the gaming industry had yet to reach.
He decided to take on the incredibly rewarding, although obviously scary, challenge with open arms. He left the team that was working on Sega Rally Championship 2 and began pulling together a team of creative individuals from different backgrounds to make it happen. He even went as far as leaving the cold glass and metal building that was Sega's main headquarters and relocated to Shibuya in an attempt to really get the creative juices flowing. The area was filled to the brim with DJs, artists, neon lights, graffiti, fashion, and obviously lots of energy. The crew was tasked with researching as many of the surrounding areas as possible within that first year, constantly finding themselves in clubs and listening to local DJ, and as this, let's be honest, greatest research in the world continued to grow, Miz discovered a group of visual DJs called Mummy's Endorphin Machine. And it was this blend of music and video that reignited the interest in music video creation once again. And before you knew it, he went and hired several members of the VDJ outfit, and the seeds of Rez were finally born. The way he saw it was that if he really was going to make a game that was truly unique and designed for people that are not really gamers in the general sense, then creating something new just isn't enough. It needed to be something new from a group of people that did things their way, a fresh way, a way that hadn't been done before. These guys had talent, not in the game development sense, sure, but instead their talents were more focused on music, art and the visual design. stuff that perhaps the average Joe that didn't really play video games would be interested in. This is what grew his new development team from just one, himself, to 20, to 40, and then eventually 60 strong within only a couple of years. And with that, United Game Artists was born. As Mitsuguchi-san got to work on his sensual masterpiece aimed at casual gamers, or as he puts it,
people that bought a PlayStation 2 and watched DVDs on it, but hardly play any games.
The original design wasn't exactly what eventually came out. Originally, the idea was to actually go to other studios such as Namco and use classic music from classic games such as Space Invaders and Xevious. Heck, even the character you play was going to originally be something similar to an alien from Space Invaders or something. As you would expect, this idea was quickly abandoned though when he realised how hard it would be to acquire those rights. Surprised by this, in an interview, Miz was asked if he ever decided to use classic Sega music instead, which he replied,
"No, we didn't." I couldn't think of any music from Sega's STGs that really stood out.
Are you serious, Miz? Only joking, I understand what he was going for, and the end result didn't fall far from the tree, as it actually ended up being an incredible mashup of different forms of electronic dance music with trance being the main influence. The developers knew that people would draw comparisons with this game's title and the popular Underworld song of the same name, and even though the game didn't actually take inspiration from that track, they went ahead with it anyway. However, the team did in fact contact Carl Hyde from Underworld to get him involved. However, due to scheduling, he was unable to commit to helping. The same can be said for Aphex Twin, Primal Screen, The Chemical Brothers, Junkie XL, Fatboy Slim, and plenty of others. And with all of that said, for the shortest time, it actually started off a little more shaded with a bit more of a hip-hop vibe. Personally, a glitchy Namco video game music themed game, or a hip-hop music themed game with possible help from people like Aphex Twin, Fatboy Slim and Chemical Brothers, well, that sounds great to me. But still, what we got was also pretty good too. Yep, at its core, Rez is still incredibly retro, taking inspiration from classic wireframe and vector graphics styled games of the 80s and injecting a good amount of Disney's Tron too. Because seriously, Japan bloody loves Tron. The idea was to take the feeling that you apparently get after your body gets taken over by repetitive dance beats which no matter how hard you try, you can't help but get sucked into. And on top of that, there really isn't anything else here that non-gamers can't pick up, play, and enjoy. It's incredibly simple, incredibly addictive, and for those of you that plug this bad boy into a powerful sound system or high-quality headphones, well, you're gonna get the ultimate gaming experience with this game.
What we wanted was to make a game where the more you played, the more it gave you this good feeling. And it just kind of escalated that feeling the longer you played. And it's something that's very easy to say in words, but if you really think about it, it's a very deep concept, but at the same time, a very primitive concept too.
Rez is a cult classic, pretty much the perfect definition of the word. At first, it may seem like a standard railgun shooter and the perfect progression to something like Panzer Dragoon, and although I do love that game, for me, this did it better. You fly through this super network called Project K, and this guy, Hacker, also known as Swizak by fans of the game, is you. And it's your job to find Eden, the AI that is controlling the data flow found within, as she has become overwhelmed with knowledge and a virus has made her question her own existence. Threatening to power down the system, which has potential to cause issues outside of this world, your job is to locate her and stop her by shooting down viruses and firewalls along your way so you can reboot her. Yeah, it's probably best you don't explain the story to your better half that normally only plays Mario Kart games, but instead just let them play this game. When in the right environment, Rez is simply a masterpiece, building up a pumping soundtrack mixed in a certain way depending on how well you play it, and as you may have guessed, I can't recommend it enough. Well, actually there is one big problem with Rez, and that it's too expensive. I mean, seriously, I don't even own an original Dreamcast copy myself anymore, but let me explain why. You see, Rez got re-released quite a bit, and pretty much every version after it's not only cheaper to own, but well, the later versions are better. Sorry retro collectors, but let's get real. Rez for the time was stunning, but as its cult following grew, so did its improvements in its re-releases. When it was finally unveiled to the public in 2001 at a PlayStation 2 party in Japan, Miz was worried. How do you show off a game that pretty much can't be explained, you may ask? Well, the answer is obvious. Dye your hair white, walk on stage, say nothing, and just play the game. As stated, this game came out extremely late for the Dreamcast, so late in fact that it came out on the PlayStation 2 in Japan at the exact same time. And yes, this is where the infamous trance vibrator packaged version came along with it. Yes, the trance vibrator, which plugs into your PlayStation 2's USB port, basically just vibrated. Chuck it in your pocket, under your shirt, anywhere. And yes, people have done that with it too. But besides the trance vibrator and the doubled frame rate, all in the expense of the graphics might I add, the PlayStation 2 version wasn't really any different. And honestly, both versions fall flat if you own an Xbox 360. Just look at the jump. Rez felt good on CRTs, but now it's finally released in True HD. And it even has the option to go back if you really want. Which you won't, because this is exactly the same game but done in True HD, and this game was always destined to be in True HD. There's not much to say here besides the fact that it looks prettier on a big widescreen HD TV. There's a couple of extra modes like a boss rush and what have you, but most importantly the core game is still here and it's the perfect way to play it. That is unless you have one of these. Rez Infinite is the final release of the game, and I'll be incredibly surprised if it will ever go further than this. Perhaps it makes the game a tad too easy in VR, but if you ask me, it's perfect, especially if you use a vibrating jacket at the same time. Okay, that's a tad extreme. Rez Infinite to me is everything that Rez always wanted to be. It's a perfect on-rails shooter that takes away the limitations of slowly moving left, right and up or down to shoot your enemies whilst pumping progressive trance music into your eardrums, completely absorbing you in its world. I've played every version up to this point, but this is easily the best, especially considering it has one final chapter or mode, whatever you want to call it, called Area X, which basically puts you in an open area, letting you line up your shots however you want and creating music along the way that I personally have never been able to replicate twice. This is the end of Rez. And that's fine with me. It was a 10 out of 10 game to begin with that somehow got better with age, if that's even possible. And if you have never played the game, it really doesn't matter if you're a gamer or not. It's 100% worth the experience.
Rez isn't a difficult game, so please be sure to try it at least once. As you play this game, you will surely experience rhythms that humans normally don't create. I know everyone has their own taste with music, but I'm quite sure that you'll find the sensation of Rez unique. Whether you find that interesting or not, of course, is something for you to decide after. So if you see Rez on display in a store or something, feel free to give it a try. It's a relax game.
Every console, whether you like to admit it or not, needs a gimmick, a special something that helps show off what it can do. Sometimes that game is a packing game like Tetris or Wii Sports, because, let's be honest, when you first saw that this was going to be the new way of playing, it's safe to say that a lot of people, including myself, We're not best pleased. What am I doing here, playing Mario Kart or changing the volume on my TV? However, a killer bit of software at launch or even during a system's life can make or break a console. It's never too late. Remember the whole Genesis does what Nintendo don't advert? Well, most people don't realise this, but this advert came out before Sonic the Hedgehog. There was no defeating Nintendo back then, not even with Sega's 16-bit machine. It had no chance against the utterly fantastic Super Mario Bros. For the NES, even with its donkey punch marketing methods. Nope, without a killer app you are going to have a hard time succeeding with your console. Which brings me to Choo Choo Rocket. Now some might say Sonic Adventure was the true system seller, as it's what us Sonic fans wanted since day one of the Saturn. And sure, it's a little bit dated now, but guaranteed this game massively helped the Dreamcast in its early days. There's still some excellent fun to have in this game. Like I said, it's dated, but for the time, this was most people's first experience with a 3D rendered Sonic. Losers, I had Sonic Jam. Anyway, Sonic Adventure was really just that, a fanboy's wet dream. Sure, it showed off the graphical capabilities of the Dreamcast, but it didn't really show off the Dreamcast's ace up its backside. A modem. Yep, unlike Sony's PlayStation 2 or any major console before it, you didn't need to buy the modem separately for the Dreamcast. Every single Dreamcast had one of these. And it wasn't until about 1 month after the release of Sonic Adventure that us Brits that signed up online with our Dreamcast actually started hearing rumblings about a free online play game. Yep, that's right, the game was completely free, but only for those that signed up online with their Dreamcast. Sega wanted to teach us that playing online with absolute strangers was the future, and what's better is that the game also worked 100% perfectly locally too. Let's take a look. You know how just the jingle and theme of old school games make your hair stand on end and just really get you excited about wanting to go back and play it? Well, I get that feeling with both the Sonic Team jingle and the crazy drum and bass infused title screen. So here we go. It's simple enough. You have a 12x9 chessboard like grid, the mice, or should I say choo-choos, come zooming out of these things in a straight line, only turning right when they hit a wall or turning completely around at a dead end. You got these 4 rockets, one of which is yours indicated by the colour, and your job is to direct the choo-choos away from your opponent's rockets and into yours. The way you do this is by dropping up to 4 arrows on the grid to direct all the choo-choos to your ship. The one with the most choo-choos wins. The main form of attack is to find a gap and redirect them to you. Now, what makes this frantic battle of arrows even more crazy is the implementation of cats, or as the game calls them, Kapu Kapus, who not only eat every single choo-choo they come into contact with, but also, if they go in your ship, you lose a third of all choo-choos you've stored up. Are you keeping up? Well, it gets even more manic. See, there are several types of choo-choos you can get. You got blue and white choo-choos that are the most common, and for every choo-choo you put in your rocket, you get 1 point. Then you have yellow choo-choos. These don't come up quite as often, but get one and you go up 50 points. And finally, you have pink and red choo-choos. These bad boys turn the manic level in the game up even further. For every single one of these you get, this happens. Now there are several different gameplay options found here. Speed up, all your choo-choos and Kapu Kapus move more quickly. Slow down, all your choo-choos and Kapu Kapus move more slowly. Mouse Mania, all Kapu Kapus disappear and large numbers of choo-choos pour out from their hatches. Cat Mania, all choo-choos and Kapu Kapus disappear and then all the Kapu Kapus will come out from their hatches. Mouse Monopoly, choo-choos flood into the player's rocket. This is your chance to boost up as much as you can. Cat Attack, a Kapu Kapu hits each other player's rocket. Place arrow again. all the arrows disappear and the game pauses for just a few seconds for you to put them all down again. Everybody move! The rockets switch places randomly, causing all your hard work to now end up in your opponent's favour. Put all this together and you get this, a massively addictive, great multiplayer game that's gonna hold up as a superb gaming experience, probably for the rest of time.
チューチューロケットネズミを助けろチューチューロケット猫は怖いチューチューロケットすごいズババババー
サバタクションバズルチューチューロケット2800円安い Dreamcast!
Now, like I said, this game was free at the beginning of its life, and in Japan they even was able to get this limited edition controller pack version of the game. Pretty damn nice if you ask me. God damn, the game even had DLC. You had to download this onto your VMU that would change the mice skins. For free, might I add. I'm looking at you, Sony, Xbox and Nintendo. Free skins. However, even though the game was not only popular and was most people's, including myself, first real experience of playing online games, it never got a sequel. However, even though the game never got a sequel, ports of the game came flooding in like nobody's business, and starting off was the Game Boy Advance version. It's pretty much what you would expect. I mean, the game wasn't exactly pushing any system limits in the first place. It's a brilliant little port, and was Sega's first ever Game Boy Advance game that they ever released. Now in Choo Choo Rocket, as well as your typical gameplay mode, you also got puzzle levels. Drop your arrows, press play, and see if your lemming-minded mice make it. The Dreamcast version had 100 of these levels. The Game Boy Advance version had 2,600 levels. Quite impressive. I doubt there are many people in the world that have finished this. The extra 2,500 levels actually came from the user-submitted levels from the Dreamcast days, which, if you ask me, is a really nice touch. I created tons of these levels back in the day, and although I would never be able to find them now, it's nice to know that some of my levels may have actually made an appearance on this cartridge. The game was also bundled a couple of times with other Sonic titles, such as the fantastic and for some reason never really talked about that much, Sonic Advance, and the oh so crappy I'm glad we don't talk about it, Sonic Battle. Unofficially in 2001, an Atari ST version of the game was released by Reservoir Gods, and surprisingly, it plays actually quite fine. For me, the real winner here is the amazing sprite work and the redone music for the hardware. I love stuff like this. However, back to the official stuff, an iOS and Android version were eventually released, and apart from the level editor, had about 50% of the puzzles from the Game Boy Advance version. Yeah, these are perfectly fine, except for the fact that they no longer exist in either of the stores. So looking back, it's safe to say that Choo Choo Rocket was not only a good game, but also quite a landmark in gaming, being most people's, including myself, first ever time playing online. And for that, you gotta tip your hat to both the Dreamcast and Choo Choo Rocket. What's crazy is that this game never got a sequel. Well actually, is it? It's a pretty basic game that done everything it was meant to do in that original console and its ports. I suppose all I'm really after is a kick-ass Wii U or 3DS game with loads of online modes. But let's be honest, that ain't gonna happen. However, every so often Sega do tease us with a little bit of Choo Choo in other Sega games. First up, we have Sega Superstars for the PlayStation 2. You know that game? It was one of those early adopters of the iToy, where you basically lower a bridge and raise bridges to guide your choo-choos to a rocket. Then you have Sonic Battle, that game I mentioned previously. A pretty piss poor game in all honesty, minus the awesome design and artwork. However, players tails and perform the mine attack, and this basically creates an explosive blue choo-choo that chases your opponent. Next up, you have the obvious appearance in Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing, where you actually control the choo-choos in the race. What's cool about this is when you play your special move, you unleash a Kapu Kapu. Who here remembers Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg? a kick-ass little platformer for the GameCube that has also sort of just sat dormant since its release. Well, you can actually summon Kapu Kapus in an egg who attack any foe in their path. And finally, you have Sega Superstar Tennis. Here you have the Choo Choo's rocket missions. It's a cool little mini game where you hit the ball to change the arrows ahead to redirect the Choo Choos into their rockets. This and Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing games are easily the best cameos, and on top of everything else, are actually great games in their own right too. So, there you have it. A one-off game with a kick-ass legacy, quite surprising considering it has just that one game, plus its ports. It's a massive shame that the Sonic team headed by the Yuji Naka have something quite special here. Yeah, it might just seem like a puzzle game on the surface, but with the crazy competitive nature of multiplayer mixed with crazy amounts of puzzles, I personally think they have something brilliantly unique here. Come on Sega, calm down with your Puyo Puyo remakes and sequels. This is the Sega puzzler to end all Sega puzzlers. And yes, I'm even looking at you, Columns.